Two. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fraternity Foodie. This is Mike Eilon with Greek University, and we call these segments Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like food to bring people together. Today, we are on episode number 25, which is just amazing. Thank you to all the listeners that have been listening from the very beginning, and we have a great guest today. We have with us the past national president for Theta Chi Fraternity, also the founder of Akademia Performance Solutions. So welcome to the show, Doug Allen.
Good morning, Mike. Good to see you.
It's great to see you as well. Let's jump right into it because we got a lot of good stuff to talk about here today. I know that you went to the University of Georgia for your undergraduate experience. So why University of Georgia, and why did you choose Theta Chi once you got there?
Sure. I grew up in Atlanta, and I knew I was going to probably stay in state. And I applied to the other big school in Georgia at the time, Georgia Tech. I was actually accepted to both. And about a month before classes started, I thought, this school academically will probably chew me up. Which leads into what we'll probably talk about. But I also visited UGA and really liked the campus, knew some people there. And I was also, at the time, I decided I didn't want an engineering career, that maybe I would go into journalism or radio, and went up to Georgia. They had a great college radio station. It was the mid-1980s, big music scene. I was sort of into that. So it all fit. So I started at Georgia as a journalism major. I worked at our campus radio station. For the first couple of years I was on campus, and I had no intention of joining a fraternity. I really wasn't interested in them, and didn't have a particularly positive attitude toward them. But then something interesting happened. I decided to switch my major. I became an economics major based on a really great professor that I had for a required class. And about that same time, I was taking another class, and a friend of mine from high school, we hadn't been particularly close through college, but we had a class together. And he invited me to go to lunch one day after class. So we went to lunch and just happened to run into some guys that he knew, and they were interested in music and some of the things I was interested in. And we chatted, and that was great. And then, a week later, same thing. We went somewhere else and ran into some other friends of his, and okay, that was great. And that happened a couple of times. And then eventually he said, hey, why don't you let's go to a basketball game. And, it's University of Georgia. It's a big football school. I'm like, we have a basketball team? Went to a basketball game, and he said, oh, it's, Henry and Kevin and some of these other guys you've met. And I'm like, okay. And that's when it dawned on me, these guys are all in the same fraternity. Well, they're not jerks. They're okay. And then eventually he said, why don't you come over to the chapter house, and we just want you to meet a few more people. And I went over, and that's when they said, well, here's the deal. We're not the biggest fraternity on this campus. We're not the best known fraternity on this campus, but you've met a lot of our guys, and we really like you, and we think you get along well with us. And you're general manager of the campus radio station. By that time, this was my junior year. Mm-hmm. I worked my way up and was general manager of the campus radio station. I said, we're really trying to do some things here. We're trying to grow our organization, and we're looking for people who can step right in and be leaders. And that sounded pretty interesting to me. So I took the plunge and did it. And a year later, I was president of the chapter, and then I graduated, and then I ended up actually working for our headquarters staff for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. That is an incredible story. And I love how they were going out to find leaders on campus. They weren't just waiting for people to come to them. They were proactively going out and doing a search of who's involved on this campus, and let's bring them in. I love that strategy. I've used that strategy over and over again in my career.
I call it stealth recruitment. I didn't know I was being recruited.
Right. It's so smart. And hopefully the undergrads that are listening today really take note of your story, and they implement that in their own chapters as well. And so you worked for headquarters. Mm-hmm. Later on, you served 2 terms as national president for
Right.
Theta Chi fraternity. You were also had prior terms as national secretary, national treasurer as well. So what makes you want to volunteer for the fraternity in this capacity when there are so many other alumni out there and most of them just stay active on a local chapter level?
Yeah, part of it was I was exposed to the national organization by working for our headquarters staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I visited, well over 100 chapters around the U.S. over a several-year period. I knew the organization. I sort of knew where we were relative to, where we could be as an organization. So I started my professional career. I'm professionally, I work in energy management consulting, so I'm not involved in higher ed or anything like that. But I have some good business experience, and I've been volunteering for a number of years. And our organization was at a point where we needed some help on the business side of the organization, and I thought I could lend a hand there. So I was open to the idea of serving on our board and was elected. And I originally served as national secretary for 2 years, and then it was sort of unusual. I bumped into the role of national president after having only been on the board for 2 years. And then actually, we have a term limit of 4 years. So then I was treasurer. So I was president and then treasurer, which is a little bit backwards. And I burned up some of the political goodwill and capital that I maybe had raised as president, and helped us restructure some finances, which really helped the organization do some things as well, as national treasurer, as I was finishing up my term on the board.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure you faced a number of challenges while you were on the board, perhaps even as national president. What are some of the things that you're most proud of? What are some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, certainly the health and safety issue is always a challenge. And anytime there's something that goes wrong there, it's just heart-wrenching, and you just feel so badly that the young men could put themselves in that situation. So you always try to make sure the organization, first and foremost, is a safe place, and that the members have the skills and you're teaching the skills to help them. And we have been growing into that as an organization. I think that one of the things that I was sort of most proud of is, as our National President's Conference, we had a President's Conference, but at the time, it was not fully funded and it was not mandatory. And this sort of ties into also what I did as treasurer. Theta Chi, for a long time, was a fairly inexpensive organization to belong to if you were an average member, right? If you were just Joe member who, you were a member of the chapter and that was your experience and that was great. If you were a chapter leader, it was very expensive, because we were asking our chapter leaders, well, figure out how to get to our president's conference or some of these other events. And sometimes the chapter would pay for it, and some of the young men would pay for that out of pocket. So we said, no, this has to be mandatory. All presidents have to come, and it's got to be paid for. So we built toward that. So our National President's Conference became mandatory and fully funded for the members to get there. Required, realigning how the chapters elected their officers, so that it was all at the same time, and they all got there. Fraternity organization, to some degree, is like a franchise. There's a national structure, but each chapter is its sort of own operating unit. Well, you wouldn't have a franchise business where you didn't train the managers all in a consistent way. So that was probably the thing that I'm most pleased with that we got accomplished. But there's so much other stuff that we did. It was a real dynamic period, and as a leader in the organization, I'm really proud that everyone now is going, wow, Theta Chi is sort of, we've done all this great stuff in the last couple of years. And I think a lot of that we set up. I can see some of the things that we did during my term paying off later. And I think that's instructive for undergrads as well. You don't have to accomplish everything on your watch, as long as you're setting the stage. There's an old phrase about, and this comes from the Lone Ranger's Creed, leave the woodpile a little bigger than you found it. and I think we did that. So that's, what I always tell people: try to leave that wood pile a little higher than you found it.
I like that. And you have to prioritize. I mean, even on a chapter level, there's probably a lot of things that you can work on, but you have to prioritize some goals and set them, accomplish them, and then leave something for the next guy to
Right.
tackle. But ultimately, you're not going to be able to do everything, unfortunately. I think some of us want to, but
Right.
just
These
impossible.
organizations have been around a long time, and hopefully will last a long time. Do your part so that it builds and builds and builds, and we
That's
get
a good
better and better.
perspective. That's an excellent perspective. Now, you've started a company called Akademia Performance Solutions. The main goal there is to help fraternity and sorority chapters achieve academic excellence using some proprietary online tools. And
Right.
I know that you have some data that was compiled in April of 2019. You also have a full data set that includes nearly 5,300 chapters, nearly
Yeah.
350,000 students, and you're able to reach some very interesting findings from what I was able to see.
Yeah.
So why is this particular goal of academic excellence, why is that so meaningful to you? And what other areas of the chapter will improve once those grades improve?
Right. Right. Well, the Academia Performance Solutions, it's a bit of a side gig. It's sort of for fun, and we're just getting going. And the online tool is. I had a call yesterday with my developers, and we're almost ready to start beta testing it. The reason I think academic performance is important is it's something I really started to see when I was on our board. Let me also say, as I mentioned, I didn't go to Georgia Tech because I knew the school would chew me up. And probably the biggest deficit of my fraternity experience was in the academic area. I don't know that it particularly helped or hurt me academically. But I later, when I was in grad school, which was much later in my 40s, I started thinking, I took an approach there that I thought, wait, the fraternity could really be more helpful here. And I started doing some research on that. And the other thing that I saw on our board, I had access to a lot of data, and I became very interested in it and started working with our staff to collect it. Academic performance is a leading indicator of good and bad in a chapter. If a chapter has excellent academic performance, you really don't see a lot of other problems most of the time. That's not always the case, but most of the time you don't. But particularly if you see a trend where a chapter over time, their academic performance starts to trend down, quite often then a bomb goes off and something bad happens. So I think it's really important to think about the data and how we look at it, to use it as a leading indicator and not just look at it and go, well, it's good or bad, but to really use it as a metric and a tool, much like a business would. It's something that's very measurable. It's real, and that's why I think the data is important. So that's why it's important to me. I think it's a tool that we can use to help our members, the students, have a better fraternity experience. They're students first and foremost. The other thing to me that's very interesting that is the fraternity and sorority experience is very unique on a college campus, and it is not being leveraged to help these students perform academically the way that it really has the potential to do. And that's what I'm really interested in changing. And I've helped some of my own chapters that I've worked with as a volunteer after my term is on our board to do some of this performance improvement, really using pencil and paper and note cards and spreadsheets, and what I'm trying to do is pull that together. But there's a lot of interesting stuff that comes out of the data we can talk about.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something. I saw the same thing within Sigma Pi. If you start to graph, let's say, a particular chapter's GPA, you can really start to predict the future almost,
Right.
in terms of when you're going to have this bomb go off, as you explained it earlier. So I think there's a lot of value to this. I think there's value to the headquarters staff. I think there's value to advisors that are working with the individual chapter. There's value even to chapter leaders to say, hey,
Absolutely.
we should look at something and we should take some corrective action before the bomb goes off.
Right.
So this is all great stuff, and I think you're onto something really big here. I was also reading that you take issue with the NIC standard for academics in that every organization needs to maintain at least 50% of its undergraduate chapters with a chapter average GPA at or above the campus all men's average. So why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that there's a problem with this standard?
Yeah, taking issue with it might be a little strong.
Okay.
I don't think it's the best metric. It's a good start, and it's not where we ultimately need to be. And partly it's boring. It's math. I mean, I think the end result needs to be that we have the majority of our individual students above the all men's or all women's on their campus, because one of the things that can happen is, well, we'll just say you've got 7 chapters, and you've got 4 small ones and everybody's above the all men's and they're doing well, and you've got 3 large ones that aren't doing very well. Well, on paper, you've got, you're better than 50%, but in reality, the majority of your individual members may be below the all men's. So ultimately, I think that's where we need to get to is looking at how are the individual members doing, and are they all having a good experience? You can sort of fudge that metric by member weighting the data, so that you can look at a large chapter versus a small chapter. So while the standard's a good start, we need to push a little harder. It needs to be enforced from the research that I've done and the huge data set that I have. What I found is the men's groups barely are above average, just barely. The women's groups are far superior, and I think we wanted to talk about that. But we need to do more to help the men's groups in particular focus on academics and utilize their fraternity experience to have a stronger academic experience on campus.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Now, in the South, I mean, I live in Nashville, and so certainly I've worked with the Sigma Pi chapter at University of Georgia, at Ole Miss, for example. These are really large chapters. Right. And then I go elsewhere in the country, and maybe to the Northeast, for example, and there are smaller chapters there, and they kind of resist getting to be a larger chapter. There seems to be this self-imposed ceiling that
Right.
the chapter themselves put into place. Nobody's ever told them that there's a ceiling, but it's a self-imposed ceiling. And I think some of the reasons why is because there's this myth out there that smaller chapters tend to have better students. And your research shows that there's a positive correlation between increased membership and academic performance. So what's the reason for the correlation?
Yeah, it's speculative, but I think that the larger groups have they have a better experience. I mean, they may be attracting more positive people, more energetic people, more focused people. They're groups that people want to join. The other thing I think is that if you go way back to about 2000, there was a study done. It's called Influences on Being Greek. I think it was Esther Torsten, might be her name, out of Missouri that did it. And it talks about why people join or don't join Greek organizations, men's groups in particular. And about 60% or so of the incoming freshmen that joined a fraternity said, well, I think it will help my grades. 30% said, well, they didn't join because they thought it would hurt. So I think if people might be more inclined to join a group that they think will help their grades, so they're going to have an easier time recruiting. But I think that's a big part of it. I think groups that can tell people, hey, we'll help your grades versus we're going to hurt your grades are going to have an easier time recruiting members. So I think that's part of it. The other thing, and one of the things I work with the students I've worked with, the groups I've worked with, to help them improve their grades. One of the things that's important to do is to match students up with mentors in the group. Hey, you're an economics major, Doug's an economics major. He can help you through and mentor you through. So I think that's a helpful part of it that we probably need to standardize more, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do with what I'm doing, to help people see that the fraternity experience can be a positive academic experience for them as well.
Yeah, I love recruiting with academics. I think that's fantastic. On so many campuses, I see recruitment flyers around talking about the different events, let's say, that are happening within a fraternity recruitment period, such as, like, I don't know, steaks and stogies, right? This is the event. We're going to have tons of people come out. But, the better approach, I think, is to recruit with academics, because today's students, they care about that. They want their grades to be good. And they are concerned that maybe the fraternity is going to bring down their grades. So let's recruit with academics instead. And so I've seen flyers created where, let's say the fraternity knows they have a bunch of students that are very good at calculus, for example.
Right.
And so they'll actually recruit with that. They'll create a flyer that says, hey, are you struggling with calculus? If so, contact this phone number and this email address, and they'll have those little slips of paper at the bottom of the flyer where you can rip it off, and it's an email address and a phone number of somebody who's going to help you with calculus. And guess what? It all leads back to the fraternity. It all leads back to the fraternity house that knows calculus better than anybody, that sits and tutors this person for, let's say, once a week for a semester. Once their grades are good and they pass calculus and they see that the chapter really cares about academics, are they going to go and join another fraternity now? Of course not. They're coming because you invested in them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, college right now it's very expensive. It's a big investment. And, a lot of people are going to be concerned about, am I enhancing my investment in college by joining this organization, or am I hurting it? So that's a key driver. And yeah, I would have pulled that little tag off to help me in calculus for sure.
Yeah, me too. It makes two of us. I struggled with calculus, and I wish I had that kind of a resource. So to the undergrads who are listening, hey, this is a great idea that you should really implement right away.
Right.
So when you start to rank some of these campus communities based on member-weighted GPA and the percent of chapters that are above the all-men's GPA. So what stands out to you when you do this ranking? What campuses are outperforming some of the others?
I won't name names, but if people want to contact me and let me know where they would stand, I'd be happy to help them with that, to understand. I think the colleges and universities, as well as the individual Greek organizations that do well, really make it a priority, and they focus on it, and they talk about it. Some of the things that I see in the reports that come in, and my data sets are essentially what I'm able to get publicly online from a Greek Life Office website, or that are submitted to me. The schools and universities that do well, they have very good reporting. So the members and the groups know sort of where they stand. Not very many track over time, but the ones that do seem to do well. So their report will show where groups are trending, and I think that's critical versus just a snapshot each semester. So I think it's that there's a focus on it, and you really see that more in the individual organizations. I mean, there are clearly some organizations, and here I will name names: Sigma Phi Epsilon, Beta Theta Pi. Amongst the larger organizations, really stand out and do an excellent job with academics. And I've talked to some people in those groups about why they think that is. Beta, it's a huge priority. You can go onto Beta's website and see the academic performance of any of their chapters. They're not afraid to show it. It's very public. And that's one of the things I think needs to change in the overall community, is let's start talking about, how does your organization value academic performance, and that component of the college experience that's so important. So that's something I hope to start to change, where eventually the fraternity that has the worst grade point average is still superior, right? That the students are getting a positive experience in that by joining their organization, they become better students. That's what we were all founded on. Let's not forget that. And I think in a lot of the conversations we have, academics are way down the list. There's other stuff. Health and safety is a priority. Absolutely. That needs to be first. I think academic performance needs to be second.
I agree with you. I love the transparency that Beta has on their website with all their chapters. And I agree with you. It shouldn't just be a snapshot. It should be something over time so we can see trends. That's much more meaningful than just the snapshot. And you know what? If you're thinking about joining a fraternity or sorority, I think you need to ask that question. Where does this particular chapter that I'm interested in, where do they fit in terms of academics amongst all the organizations on campus? And that should be made public on the website, on the Greek Life website for whatever school you're attending. If not, go to the Greek Life office and ask. They need to ask the question, show me the GPA by chapter, so that way I understand where does this organization fit in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and I think that's a conversation that it's important to have on the campus, because I'm able, on any given term, I can get about 200 reports pretty easily. Scrubbing the data and getting it into my data set's a lot of work, because it's PDFs and different things, and it's a lot of transcription. But there are far more than 200 campuses that have Greek Life.
Yes.
So we need more transparency, and I realize some of the colleges and universities are smaller, and that's a lot of work to put that together, but it needs to be a priority. Some colleges and universities have a different approach to it because of FERPA. They may be hesitant to share grades. Smaller groups get excluded from that calculation because of transparency issues. You don't want to say, well, if a group only has 3 members, and this is their grade point, you don't really want to do that either. But I think the conversation that the campus professionals need to have is what's the best way to do this, and let's start having some dialogue about what's the best way to put the data together, to share it, to collaborate. I know some universities have done studies to compare themselves to their sort of peer and aspirational groups to see how they perform academically, and that's a great thing, because all the colleges and universities can have their students have a better academic experience if they focus on it as part of the Greek Life experience.
Mm-hmm. Once, when I started looking at the GPA data for Sigma Pi for 120 chapters, let's call it, it seems that the men do better in the spring semester versus the fall semester. And that seems to be pretty consistent.
That's what I found too.
Yeah. So what theories do you have on this? Why is that happening?
Recruitment, I think my personal opinion is that the new member education process is probably, might overcomplicate it, and don't focus on the academic component of that enough. I haven't done a whole lot of research yet to see if the new members are performing better than the existing members, but I don't think it's the new members themselves bringing that down. I think there's so much packed into the fall semester on most campuses between recruitment, new member education, football, and the big events that go with that. And we could probably balance out our programming a little bit, and bring that more into line.
Yeah,
I don't really see that as much with the women's groups.
Yeah, that's so interesting. We have to do something about that because we know it's going to happen every single year. So there has to be some kind of focus on academics and scholarship in the fall, knowing all of this. So take a look at those trends. I think it's interesting for even on a chapter level to look at that. And if they see that correlation, let's do something about it instead of knowing full well that we're going to suffer in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because it's with the men's groups particularly. It's not the all men's GPA, it's the fraternity GPA. So the all men's group, its GPA is sort of static, and the fraternity drop down. So it's not just all the men on campus are going to football games or that type of thing. It's our men are are underperforming the other men on campus during that same time period.
Right. It's something about the fraternity experience. So we got to look at that.
Yeah, and I don't, and I want to be cautious here because I'm very much for, you know, year-round recruitment. I'm not a big fan of deferred recruitment, but I think we can make the fraternity experience be positive for those new members, and if we can do that so that they actually outperform during their new member period, we can turn that around.
Yeah, and it's my position that they should be outperforming during their new member education period.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, they should have access to more resources than they had before they joined the organization. So in theory, they should be able to find other brothers that are in their major. And I certainly had that. I had people to show me the way, to help me choose which professors I should be, you know, choosing, and, you know, their learning styles and all of that stuff to figure out what is going to give me the best chance for success in this particular class.
Well, one of the things that I've done with the groups that I've worked with, and this is what my online platform will ultimately do. A student will be able to put in their academic goals, even down to the class level. So they'll say, okay, I'm taking art history, biology, and calculus, and my personal goal is an A and a B, and well, maybe I hope I get a C in calculus. But then what will happen is they will automatically be matched up with the members of their group that got an A or a B in all of those classes. So it will say, okay, you know, you need to go talk to Mike because he got an A in calculus already, because your new members were going to be freshmen and sophomores. There's going to be members of that group who've taken most of those classes. So you need to match those up. So really I think more important than sort of the big brother, big sister, it's, hey, I have an academic mentor that's going to help me, who cares about my academic performance as much as anything else. Mm-hmm. And let's make it a challenge. Let's gamify it a little bit so that they can have some fun with academic performance and do that. And that's really what's different about the fraternity and sorority experience versus most other college students, is you have people that care about you. You have people who've taken the classes you're taking. Let's utilize that. Let's leverage that. Let's make it a fun, positive experience so that people are excited about performing well academically. And then people are going to want to join our organizations because they're not going to get that academic help in that way, you know, living in a residence hall necessarily, or living off campus, but they'll get it in the Greek experience.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I like that we're going beyond just the big brother or big sister relationship. One of the best things that I've seen from an academic standpoint at a few of our chapters, I noticed it starting to spread and academics went up accordingly, was this fantasy scholarship teams that the chapter implemented, which I thought was fantastic. It works just like a fantasy football or a fantasy baseball or fantasy hockey type of league, in that they basically took, let's say, the top 10 GPAs in the chapter. These top 10 men would be the lead for their team, and they would randomly get to pick somebody from the chapter to be on their scholarship team, and they would go through in like an S-style draft, picking people that they think are going to perform well under their tutelage. And then at the end of the semester, they would have a prize for whichever scholarship team actually outperformed. So I just love that kind of a strategy. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it brings the focus to academics almost on a weekly basis.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was on our national board, I had access to some old records and things, and I found something very interesting. It was from the very early 1950s. I had an old chapter minutes book, and I was reading in there, and the chapter actually voted to not have a social event that weekend because their grades weren't good. They didn't study hard enough during the week.
Wow.
Can you imagine a chapter doing that today, saying, well, we're going to call off the social event because, you know, we haven't been studying hard enough. But I think if you can gamify it a little bit and take that attitude, that really helps. And that's some of the stuff I'm trying to build into what I'm doing to make that process fun and easy. And
I like that. Now, speaking of big sisters, what do you see when you compare NPC groups, Panhellenic, versus the men or IFC groups?
Oh, the women kick the men's tail. I mean, it's absolutely not only in general, between the men's and the women's, but the women outperform non-affiliated undergraduate women to a greater degree. You know, like I said, the men's group's just barely above the all men's when you sort of look at it. The women's groups outperform other women on their campus. One thing, so my data set, I've got literally, well over 1,000 different campuses, semesters, right? And one of the metrics I always look at is the all men's and the all women's on each of these. I've only found one semester, so essentially 3 years worth of data, couple hundred schools, one time where the all women's group was below the all men's.
Wow.
And I think it's a mistake. I've tried to get the school to look at it and tell me. So literally out of 1,000 data points, I can find one where the men outperform the women. And I think it's a mistake because the semesters on either side of that, the women outperform the men. So I just think it's a transposition of a number.
Wow.
So in general, the women are doing much better than the men, and I think that's something that men need to be cognizant of, because my company, my day job, we hire students or recent graduates all the time, and your grade point is your ticket. And some people will say, well, it's not, but that's your ticket. And for a lot of sort of data analysis jobs and things that people might think, well, that's, maybe more of a techie type position or something like that. We hire more women than men because the women have better grades, and that grade point demonstrates that they're going to be more focused and be able to concentrate on the task at hand better. So the men need to be aware of that the women are kicking their tail, which is a good thing, but let's challenge people and bring everybody up.
Right. So interesting. So interesting. So how should fraternities and sororities help create environments where the members help each other excel academically? And also, what role should the headquarters play in all of this?
I think the headquarters, at an undergraduate level, set goals, be aware, track your performance. If you have a big calendar up on your website or at your chapter facility, you have a bulletin board, track your grade point over time. Start setting some goals for yourself as a chapter, and I've got some great easy ways to do that I can tell people about. But make it front and center. Make it the culture. That's the only way to change. I mean, there's only been one book ever written about fraternity scholarship, and it's from the 1950s. And even then it says it's really about changing the culture, right? So that's what you have to do. The other thing is is track out the individual members, your officers, whoever's responsible for scholarship. Look at the individual membership data, because one of the things I see, it's not that everybody in the chapter is doing poorly, it's that they tolerate a few people that are doing really poorly, and that brings it down. So what I tell people in my organization is, because it's consistent with the values of our organization, the first thing you do is you essentially give them the warning to say, hey, we've noticed your grades are really not good here. Let us help you. But then if they don't accept that help, then they need to find something else to do outside the organization. They need to not be part of the organization. So focus on individual members. Try to help them first, but then have a consequence if they don't want to accept that help or don't perform. So I think that's part of it. At the national level, track it. Be aware of how your groups are doing. Address those groups that need help. Enforce your standards and really make it part of your culture. You can celebrate the positive aspects. Make your national award for academics be as big an award as anything else. Celebrate that. Let groups know where they stand, and talk to those that need help. I think that's important. Just make it a front and center part of the culture.
I love what you said there. Front and center. It should be a conversation that we have on a weekly basis in our chapter
Yep.
meetings. I like having a goal, a published goal that the members have to see and look at every single week. I think that's fantastic. I also think we need to make academics a part of recruitment. So if you're not talking about
Right.
academics during the recruitment period and actually looking at the academic scholarship focus of every person that you give an invitation to, that really needs to be a part of your recruitment plan. And I think the more we can integrate our scholarship chairman along with our recruitment chairman to get them both on the same page
Yep.
in terms of who we give invitations to, that's really the key to changing the culture like you talked about.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent, excellent stuff. So I know you're originally from Atlanta. You're not originally from
Right.
Minnesota. So let's assume, I go through Atlanta a lot, the airport, obviously, connections, et cetera. Where should we eat if we end up in Atlanta?
In Atlanta, you should go to the Varsity. The Varsity is right across the road from Georgia Tech, although I think there's one in the airport too. It's been there since the 20s, and it's the world's largest hot dog stand, basically. Um, it's a great story. So it's chili dogs with onions and sort of these perfectly, it's a combination of greasy and crispy onion rings and a frosted orange. They're just great. And the Varsity is really about bringing people together, Mike, which I know is a big part of why you call your podcast Fraternity Foodie. A lesson I learned when I was very young. My dad ran an industrial laundry, right? Big facility. And he was sort of the company's turnaround guy, and that's how we ended up in Atlanta. And he would have to run this plant on weekends sometimes. And I'd go with him. And I was about, 10 years old. This is the mid 1970s in Atlanta. And, you're having people work on the weekend and it's sort of hot and it's not the greatest thing in the world. My dad would send me with an older gentleman and a truck, and we'd go to the Varsity, and my dad would have us load up on hot dogs, chili dogs, onion rings, Cokes, frosted oranges, all that stuff for all the people that were working in the plant that weekend. And we'd go back, and everybody they appreciated that they did, somebody did something special and nice for them. And it was just a hot dog, but people really appreciated that. And I saw that as a young age that show some appreciation. Food's a great way to do that. It's a common denominator. So that, to me, was a good experience, despite the food was great. So I liked the Varsity. When I was national president, we had a board meeting in Atlanta, and instead of going out to eat at a fancy restaurant, I took everybody to the Varsity after our board meeting, because it's a place in Atlanta. You can be a high-powered executive in a suit, and you're at the Varsity, or you could be a guy or gal who's sort of down on their luck and scrounge together a few bucks to get something to eat. You're at the Varsity. Everybody in Atlanta goes to the Varsity, and everybody can come together there. And that's why it's my favorite place to eat.
That's perfect. You see, there is a method to my madness. It brings people together no matter who you are. Everybody can agree on a good hot dog, right? So that's fantastic.
That's right.
Really, really good stuff. So if a listener wants to talk to you about your research and academics, or maybe how you can help their organization, their campus, their council, or even their own chapter, what's the best way to contact you? What's the best way to connect with you to get more information about what you're doing?
The easiest to remember might be on Twitter at Greek GPA. So you can touch base there. And I don't post a lot of stuff, but I do from time to time. The website for Akademia Solutions, it's academia.solutions, and that's Akademia with a K. So you can go there, or just D. Allen at Akademia Solutions, but Twitter might actually be the easiest. I probably need to change my website so it's a little easier for people to find. But yeah, I'd love to share what I've got with people and start the conversation, and hopefully we'll have some tools that people can use here pretty quick.
That's fantastic. Doug, I just want to say that I really appreciate you, even going back to the days when I was executive director of Sigma Pi. You were always so gracious with your time and answered all of my questions whenever I needed somebody to bounce ideas off of, or to try and figure out what some of our competitors were out there were doing. You were always so gracious, and you just kind of opened up your books and said, hey, how can I help you? And I think that's what I love most about you, is that you're really focused on the, the Greek movement. You certainly understand that if you can grow the Greek movement overall, that Theta Chi is going to be a part of that. And I just really appreciate all the support. I know you're an avid listener to the Fraternity Foodie podcast.
Oh, it's great.
So I really appreciate you just calling me and saying, hey, you're doing a great job with this, and that there's value out there for a podcast like this that really focuses on the fraternity world and how we can work together in order to grow it. So, you've always been such a great supporter, and I'm just humbled by that. And I just want to say I appreciate you. I appreciate Theta Chi, guys like Mike Mayer and you and others, Dave Westall. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Dave Connor. I mean, I can never stop and talk about how great the men are at Theta Chi. So I appreciate everything that you've done, not only for your organization, but for the greater good of all fraternities. So thank you.
At the end of the day, we're all on the same team.
We really are all on the same team. And the sooner that everybody realizes that, I think the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. Keep up the great work, Michael.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you to the listeners for listening. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.